Everyone wants to win when things are easy, when the sun is shining, when the money's flowing, when the relationships feel smooth and the path looks clear. But the true test of your character, the moment that separates the talkers from the doers, the average from the extraordinary, is how you show up when the sky turns dark, when the storm hits, when no one's cheering and everything feels like it's falling apart. It's not what you do when you feel strong. It's what you do when your knees are shaking, your faith is flickering, and life is whispering in your ear. Maybe you're not enough. Because here's the truth. Winners aren't born in comfort. They're forged in crisis. They are built in the shadows of doubt, in the back rooms of disappointment, in the silence when no one is watching and no one is clapping. You don't learn how to win in easy times. You learn how to win when everything is screaming at you to give up, when life pulls the rug, when the plans fall apart, when people turn their backs. That's where the real ones rise. Not in grand moments, but in gritty ones. Not with perfect timing, but with relentless heart. Let me tell you something no one puts on a billboard. Pain is a prerequisite. If you're hurting right now, if you're walking through hell in your career, your health, your finances, your mind, you are not being punished. You're being prepared, because growth doesn't come in comfort. Growth comes when your back is against the wall and you still choose to fight. It comes when the world tells you to quit, but something deeper inside you says, not yet. You see, there's a kind of strength you can only earn in the fire. You can't fake it. You can't download it. You can't borrow it from someone else. You have to become it. And you only become it by staying in the fight longer than your fear says you can. So let me ask you, who are you when things go wrong? Who are you when the money dries up, the doors slam shut, and the path disappears? Because that version of you, that's who you really are. And you get to decide whether that version crumbles or creates something new. Winning in difficult situations is not about avoiding the storm. It's about learning how to walk through it without losing your fire, without losing your voice, without losing yourself. Mindset is everything, and not the fake kind. Not positive vibes only while your world is on fire. I'm talking about the kind of mindset that gets back up bloody and says, this won't end me. The kind that says, this is not how my story ends. This pain will not define me. This season may break things, but it will also build things. You can't control the storm, but you can control your center. You can control your breath. You can control the decision to keep showing up, even if your hands are shaking, even if your voice trembles, even if your faith is held together by threads. Because courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It's showing up again and again and again when every part of you wants to run. The people you admire most, the heroes, the leaders, the legends, they didn't become great in spite of their challenges. They became great because of them. The heartbreak shaped them. The failure sharpened them. The betrayal taught them who they were. The rejection gave them redirection. They didn't just survive hard times. They used them. They turned pain into fuel, loss into lessons, obstacles into evolution. Because the truth is, and don't ever forget this, every difficult moment is raw material for greatness. You're either using the pressure or being crushed by it. There is no in between. But what does it look like to win when everything's stacked against you? It doesn't always look like trophies or applause. Sometimes winning looks like getting out of bed when you want to stay buried. Sometimes it's making that one hard phone call. Sometimes it's walking away from the old version of you that's no longer serving your future. It's not always loud. It's not always cinematic, but it's real. And it's yours. You win when you stay aligned with your values, when it's inconvenient. You win when you lead with integrity, when no one's watching. You win when you choose peace over revenge, growth over comfort, faith over fear. And those wins, they may be invisible to the world, but they make you undeniable over time. Because when you do the work in the dark, you don't have to beg for the spotlight. It finds you. Resilience isn't just endurance. It's adaptation. You don't just hang in there. You adjust. You learn. You stretch. You grow sharper, wiser, deeper. You use the difficulty to become more dangerous in the best possible way. Not reckless, not destructive, but unshakable. Because you've been through fire, and you know how to walk through it now without losing your soul. This is the power no one can give you. And more importantly, no one can take it from you. Not circumstances, not critics, not even failure. You become rooted, clear, centered, purpose-driven, even when the pressure mounts. And that's when life begins to shift. Not because it's easier, but because you're no longer easy to knock over. You've built a foundation inside that holds, even when the outside breaks. And that kind of strength, that's what builds empires. That's what changes legacies. That's what wins battles that no one else even sees. Leadership is not a title. It's not a corner office or a nameplate or 1,000 followers nodding in agreement. Leadership is a weight, a sacred responsibility, a fire that must be carried not for your own glory, but for the growth of others. And if you do it right, you don't just lead people, you lift them. You don't just give orders, you give identity. Because real leadership is not about being in charge. It's about being charged with a vision that's bigger than you, a purpose that stretches beyond your comfort, and a commitment to truth that does not waver when tested. And here's the truth. Every generation redefines leadership. But the principles, the truths, they do not change. They echo through time. They whisper through the decades. They burn through noise and trends and surface-level hype. Because leadership, at its core, is timeless. It is not dictated by technology. It is not confined to platforms. It is not reshaped by fashion or filtered by popularity. It is a foundation, a way of being, a standard you carry even when the world is too distracted to notice. The greatest leaders, from ancient kings to modern CEOs, from battlefield generals to high school mentors, all carry the same flame. It's the flame of responsibility, the flame of vision, the flame of sacrifice. They all understood one thing. Leadership isn't about having power over people. It's about holding power for people. It's about becoming the kind of person others can trust with their future. And trust, that's the real currency. You don't lead with fear. You don't lead with manipulation. You don't lead with charisma alone. You lead with trust, earned slowly, kept fiercely. And trust is built not in speeches, but in standards, in how you show up when the spotlight is gone, in how you respond when the pressure rises, in how you treat those who can't offer you anything but honesty. If people trust your character, they will follow your vision. So, if you want to lead, truly lead, you must first lead yourself. Because you cannot take people somewhere you haven't gone. You cannot demand discipline in others if you make excuses in private. You cannot call for vision if you're still hiding from clarity. Leadership begins not with authority, but with alignment. You must become the standard you speak about. You must become the proof before you become the plan. Because people don't follow instructions. They follow example. And this is where most fail. They want the influence without the inner work. They want the loyalty without the integrity. They want the spotlight without carrying the torch. But you can't fake depth. You can't shortcut trust. You either embody the values or you violate them. There is no neutral ground. Because every time you speak, your team is watching. Your family is watching. The next generation is watching. And what they need from you is not inspiration without substance. They need consistency without cracks. Your words mean nothing if your habits scream something else. Your mission is just noise if your mindset is still at war with itself. That's why real leadership begins in silence, in the moments before the decisions, in the way you carry your own chaos, in the standards you set when no one is looking. You don't wait to lead when the time is right. You lead when it's hard, when it's unclear, when it's unpopular. That's when your voice becomes a compass. not a microphone. Because leadership is not about being liked. It's about being trusted. And trust often requires saying what no one else will say, doing what no one else wants to do, making the call that others will avoid. You cannot fear being misunderstood because if your values are true, they will outlive the criticism. And if your vision is real, the right people will find their way to it, not because you shouted louder, but because you stood stronger. And when it comes to generations old and new, the true test of leadership is not how much you teach, but how much you're willing to learn. You must be rooted in wisdom, but flexible in expression. You must honor the past without becoming trapped in it. You must welcome the future without forgetting what matters. Every generation sees the world differently, and that's not a threat. It's an opportunity. Because leadership that lasts is leadership that listens. Younger generations don't want perfect leaders. They want honest ones. Ones who admit mistakes, ones who ask questions, ones who know the weight of their words. And older generations? They want relevance, but they also want reverence. They want to know their sacrifices meant something, that their scars became bridges, that their lessons are not discarded, but woven into progress. That's your job. To stand between generations, not as a divider, but as a bridge. To take the strength of the past and the potential of the future and forge something timeless. Something rooted in character, not clout. In courage, not convenience. Because the leaders who last, the ones remembered long after their voices fall silent, are not the loudest in the room. They are the deepest. They don't need to dominate. They don't need to shine. They need to serve. And not in a way that begs for recognition, but in a way that builds people. That raises standards, that strengthens culture, that multiplies vision through the hearts of others. Because service isn't weakness. It's the highest form of strength. It says, I am here not to be above you, but to walk with you. And to serve like that, you must be humble enough to admit you don't know everything. You're not always right. You're not the hero in every story. In fact, great leaders don't need to be the hero at all. They raise heroes. They pour courage into others. They don't hoard the light, they reflect it. And in doing so, they create movements, not monuments. But that kind of leadership, it requires radical ownership. No blaming, no hiding. No, that's not my fault. If something breaks under your watch, you own it. If someone falls under your leadership, you learn from it. You don't run from responsibility, you grow inside it. Because leadership isn't about comfort, it's about accountability. You take the hit. You stand in the fire. You look people in the eye and say, this is on me and I'll fix it. And that kind of ownership builds resilience. Because let's be honest, leading people will break your heart. It will test your patience. It will stretch your capacity. You'll be misunderstood, betrayed, ignored. You'll give everything and watch people walk away like it was nothing. And still you stay. Still you build. Still you rise. Because resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about growing stronger while you carry the weight. It's about continuing to believe in the mission, even when no one else claps, even when the room goes quiet, even when your hands shake and your voice is tired. You show up again and again and again, because your presence, your consistency becomes the proof, the evidence that says this matters, the signal that says you're not alone. Because sometimes the most powerful leadership isn't in your speeches, it's in your stability. And if you really want to lead across generations, you must give more than instructions. You must give identity. Help people see who they are. Remind them of what they can become. Pull out the greatness that's hiding beneath insecurity, pain, and doubt. That's not management. That's ministry. That's not systems. That's spirit. That's the difference between a boss and a builder. So build. Speak life into people who are used to silence. Believe in those who've forgotten how to believe in themselves. Lead in such a way that your presence is not about being needed, but about empowering others to no longer need you. That's legacy. That's leadership. And when your leadership becomes a mirror, when people see their own potential more clearly because of how you showed up, then you haven't just led a generation. You've lifted it. Let me tell you something most people never figure out. The world doesn't move on truth alone. It moves on belief. It moves on influence. It moves when someone somewhere says the right words, in the right tone, at the right time, and suddenly doors open, minds shift, resistance melts, and people say the one word that changes everything. Yes, not because they were forced, not because they were tricked, but because something about that moment, something about you, gave them permission to believe, to trust, to follow, to take a chance. This is the art of persuasion. And let me be clear, this is not manipulation. This is mastery. The mastery of connection, the mastery of energy, the mastery of intent. Because when you truly understand what makes people say yes, you no longer chase opportunities, you create them. You don't hope for influence, you command it. You don't beg for attention, you earn it. With presence, with power, with purpose. And the first secret, the foundation of all persuasion, is certainty. People do not follow need. They do not follow desperation. They do not follow indecision. They follow certainty. The one who moves people is the one who knows who they are, what they believe, and where they're going, and they say it like they mean it. If your voice trembles, the room will doubt. If your conviction is weak, the world will hesitate. But when your soul speaks with alignment, with conviction, with clarity, you don't just communicate, you transmit. Certainty is magnetic. It draws people in, not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. And clarity is the rarest language of all. So I'll ask you, no. Were you clear on who you are? Because persuasion doesn't start with other people. It starts with persuading yourself. You must become the first believer in what you say. You must be sold on the value you bring. You must know in your bones that your offer, your message, your vision is worth leaning into. And if you don't believe it, no one else will. This is the internal work that fuels external power. Next comes the rhythm of words. The way you speak matters. Have you ever noticed how some people can speak a single sentence and the room quiets, while others ramble for hours and say nothing of weight? It's not just what they say, it's how they say it. Great persuaders speak with structure. They speak with music. Their words have a pulsy rise and fall, a cadence that feels inevitable. Not rushed, not chaotic intentional. Because humans don't just respond to logic, they respond to feeling. They say, I don't know why, but I just feel like I can trust her. I can't explain it, but something about the way he said it, it stuck with me. That's not an accident. That's technique. That's tone. That's the art of landing your words in the nervous system, not just the brain. But none of that works without presence. Presence is persuasion's secret weapon. When you are truly here, when you are fully in the moment, not scattered, not rehearsing, not doubting, but rooted, people feel it. Presence is rare in a distracted world. And anything rare becomes valuable. So the moment you show up fully attuned, alert, listening, grounded, you become powerful. Most people live like ghosts, half present, half distracted, half alive. But when you bring your whole self to a conversation, when your eyes say, I see you, when your energy says, I'm with you, when your words say, I understand you, people lean in, they open, they soften, and the gate to influence swings wide open. And let's talk now about the greatest tool in the persuader's arsenal. Questions. See, amateurs speak to convince. Masters ask to uncover. Because the secret to getting people to say yes is not to tell them what they need, it's to help them realize it themselves. And nothing pulls truth from the soul faster than the right question. Why do you think that hasn't worked for you yet? What would it mean to finally get this handled? If you knew success was guaranteed, what would you do next? These are not random. These are precision tools designed to bypass the surface and hit the core. Because here's the truth. People don't change because of your advice. They change because of their own realizations. So the great persuader is not a preacher, they're a mirror. They hold space for clarity to emerge. They create conditions for truth to rise. They ask, they listen, and they reflect what others have been too afraid or too distracted to see. And then only then do they guide. Because persuasion is a dance, not a dictatorship. It's a rhythm of give and take, speak and pause, offer and wait, push and release. And just like a dance, it requires attunement to mood, to energy, to resistance. You don't bulldoze someone into yes. You invite them into it. You make the path appealing, obvious, irresistible. And the way you do that is through story. Facts tell, stories sell, because stories bypass skepticism. They slip under defenses. They make people feel something. A statistic makes you nod. A story makes you believe. You can say 90% of people fail because they never take action. And someone might agree. But if you say, let me tell you about a man I knew, talented, hungry, filled with potential, but he waited too long. He kept saying, next week, next year, when I'm ready. And when life finally handed him the opportunity, he had no fire left to take it. That hits different. That lands because we are wired for story. We see ourselves in story. And when someone sees themselves in your message, they say yes. Not because of you, but because of them. Because something clicked inside. Something lit up. Something said, this is me, and I need to move. So here's what you must remember. Persuasion is not about pushing. It's about awakening. It's not about conquest. It's about connection. It's not about getting your way. It's about showing someone their way more clearly, more powerfully, more vividly than they've ever seen it before. This is not about trickery. This is about transformation. And you can only lead others there if you've walked it yourself. So become persuasive not by learning tactics, but by becoming magnetic. By being so aligned with your message, so congruent with your energy, so present with your words, so generous with your intent, that people don't just hear you, they trust you. Because the most persuasive person in the room is not the one with the loudest voice. It's the one with the clearest spirit. And when your spirit speaks, the world says yes. There is another truth no one talks about enough. Persuasion, real persuasion, begins before a single word leaves your mouth. It begins with how you see the world, because your view of people determines your approach to people. If you see people as obstacles, you'll try to overpower them. If you see people as wallets, you'll try to sell them. But if you see people as mirrors, reflections of the same hunger, fear, longing, and hope that lives in you, then you don't try to conquer them, you connect. And when people feel that you see them not just as a means to an end, but as human, worthy, important, they listen. Not because you demanded attention, but because you earned resonance. You touched something ancient inside them. You reminded them that beneath the noise, the roles, the masks, we are the same. That's the paradox of persuasion. You become more powerful the moment you stop trying to win people and start trying to understand them. That's when everything shifts, because now you're not speaking at them. You're speaking from within them. And here's where clarity comes in. You cannot persuade if you are not clear. If your mind is foggy, your message will fumble. If your intention is scattered, your influence will fall flat. The world is full of noisome millions of voices shouting at once. So when you speak, you better make it count. You better speak with a blade, not a broom. Cut through, pierce through, hit the heart. That means before you open your mouth, you must ask yourself, what do I really want them to feel? What do I want them to know? What decision do I want them to make, not just in their mind, but in their bones? Clarity sharpens your energy. And people can feel when you're clear, just like they can feel when you're bluffing, when you're vague, when you're uncertain, even if your words are smooth. Don't underestimate the radar people have for realness. You want to be persuasive? Be clear. You want people to say yes? Give them a reason to trust your direction. Because clarity leads, and people want to follow someone who knows where they're going. Now let's talk about vision. Because persuasion isn't just about solving problems, it's about casting possibilities. The greatest persuaders don't just convince you to leave where you are. They paint a picture of where you could be. They hold a mirror to your potential, not just your pain. They don't say, "You're broken, let me fix you." They say, "You're powerful, and I'm here to wake it up." That's vision. Vision makes people rise. Vision makes people move. Because people aren't hungry for more products, more noise, more empty promises. They're hungry for meaning, for purpose, for a story worth stepping into. And if you can describe the future better than they can imagine it, they'll follow you straight into it. But here's the catch. You cannot give a vision you haven't seen yourself. You must have tasted it, touched it, believed it. You must speak of the mountaintop because you've climbed either because you're climbing it now. If your vision is borrowed, recycled, half believed, no one will follow you because we can't lead people into places we're not willing to go. So before you try to get anyone else to say yes, you need to say yes to your own vision. Yes to the work. Yes to the responsibility. Yes to the pressure of carrying purpose in a world that celebrates noise over truth. And when your yes is real, when your yes has roots, others will feel it. Let's bring in the muscle that supports it all. Discipline. Because you can have clarity. You can have belief. You can even have vision. But if you don't have discipline, you will be inconsistent. And inconsistency kills persuasion. One day you're lit with energy. The next day you disappear. One day you're inspiring. The next day you're scrambling. And people notice because consistency builds credibility. Discipline says, "You can count on me. I don't show up only when I feel like it. I show up because I said I would." You want to persuade others? Start by keeping the promises you make to yourself. If you say you're going to study, do it. If you say you're going to train, do it. If you say you're going to build, speak, write, lead, do it. Not perfectly, but persistently. Because when you respect your own word, others begin to trust it too. Discipline doesn't make you robotic. Discipline makes you reliable. And in a world filled with broken promises, unreliability, and fake charisma, being real, consistent, and clear is your greatest competitive edge. Let's now talk about what turns words into motion. Action. You can know all the techniques. You can read all the books. You can listen to all the speeches. But none of it matters until you use it. Until you test it. Until you risk hearing no. Because here's the truth. Persuasion is not theory. It's practice. It's sweat. It's rhythm. It's rejection. It's recalibration. And every great persuader you admire today, they weren't born with the ability. They built it through awkward conversations, through feedback, through misfires, through refinement. So stop waiting until you know enough. Stop preparing endlessly. Stop thinking your confidence will come before you act. Confidence doesn't precede action. Confidence is the reward for courage. Say that again. Confidence is the reward for courage. It's the fruit of showing up again and again, even when your voice shakes, even when the room goes cold, even when they don't buy, even when they don't clap, because you're becoming the person who leads anyway. That's real power. That's real persuasion. And when people see that you don't flinch, that you don't back down, when the yes doesn't come immediately, they respect you. Because the world doesn't just need convincing voices. It needs convicted ones. Ones that don't sway in the wind of opinion. Ones that are rooted in principle. Ones that act from alignment, not approval. And when your action matches your message, when your life is your pitch, people say yes before you even open your mouth. Because the world doesn't just need more voices. It needs more anchors. People who don't get blown away by rejection. People who aren't addicted to applause. People who can walk into a room, speak truth with calm fire, and leave even if no one claps, knowing they did what needed to be done. That's rare. That's real. That's irresistible. You want to know what makes people say yes without hesitation? It's alignment. When your words match your energy, when your actions match your message, when your story matches your standards, you become undeniable. You become someone others want to follow not because you told them to, but because they feel safer in your direction than in their own hesitation. And here's another truth. People don't just say yes to you. They say yes to who they become in your presence. They say yes to the version of themselves you reflect back to them. So, if you want to be more persuasive, stop obsessing over your pitch and start elevating your presence. Because presence creates permission. When someone feels seen by you, when someone feels understood by you, when someone feels lifted by the way you hold space for their highest self, they say yes because they want more of that. They want more of themselves, the way you showed them they could be. That's not sales. That's service. That's not closing. That's calling. Because great persuasion isn't about pushing people across the finish line. It's about drawing out the hero that's been waiting to rise. So now we arrive at one of the most overlooked, yet most potent pieces of persuasion. Gratitude. Yes, gratitude. Why? Because gratitude is grounding. Gratitude keeps your influence from turning into arrogance. It keeps your power pure. When you're grateful not just for outcomes, but for the opportunity to speak, to serve, to lead you, stop sounding like a manipulator and start sounding like a missionary. And people can feel that difference. Gratitude brings humility. Humility brings trust. And trust opens doors that strategy alone never could. When you enter a conversation with a heart full of appreciation, not entitlement, you don't try to extract value from others. You add value. You elevate. You uplift. You give without keeping score. And in doing so, people lean closer. They listen longer. And more often than not, they say yes. Not just to your offer, but to your energy. Let's move forward to something that separates the amateurs from the artists. Adaptability. Because you can be the most skilled speaker in the world, but if you can't read the room, you'll lose the room. If you can't sense when to lean in and when to pull back, if you can't pivot when someone's guard goes up, if you deliver a scripted monologue while ignoring the signals right in front of you, you become predictable. And persuasion dies in predictability. The greatest persuaders are not locked into scripts, they're synchronized with the moment. They listen, they feel, they observe, they respond. They adjust their tone, their pace, their volume, their story, not to manipulate, but to meet people where they are. Because if you meet people where they are, you can take them where they've never been. But if you preach from a distance, you'll never move them an inch. So ask yourself, are you trying to be impressive or impactful? Because adaptability is not weakness, it's wisdom. You're not changing your truth. You're changing your delivery so that the truth actually lands. This is where resilience enters. Because, let's be honest, there will be people who don't say yes. There will be doors that don't open. There will be audiences that stare blankly, clients who ghost you, critics who mock you, and even friends who doubt you. And in those moments, your ego will want to shut down, to pull back, to protect itself from rejection. But your mission has to be stronger than your pride. Because if one no can make you question your message, you were never carrying a message. You were carrying a need for approval. But if you can keep speaking truth even when it echoes, if you can keep showing up even when your voice trembles, if you can hold your ground not with aggression but with peaceful certainty, you become unshakable. And that is when people start to trust you. Because they're not just watching what you say, they're watching what you do when it's hard. Resilience is persuasive. Because when others fold and you stay, when others fade and you remain, when others doubt and you still deliver, people can't ignore you anymore. Because you've become something very few ever become. Reliable. Reliable people are rare. And what is rare becomes valuable. In a world where people quit at the first sign of discomfort, in a world where everyone wants to be heard but few want to listen, in a world where people show up only when it's easy, you become persuasive the moment you consistently do what others refuse to. You show up, not for attention, but out of alignment. You speak, not to impress, but to impact. You ask, not to control, but to connect. This is the kind of reliability that moves nations, the kind of reliability that builds movements, the kind of reliability that makes your yes powerful and your no respected. And now let's go to the final piece, learning. See, persuasion is not a final destination. It's not a medal you earn and hang on your chest forever. It's a practice, a process, a path of endless refinement. Because people change, culture changes, language shifts, contexts evolve. So the master persuader never stops learning. You study human behavior not out of manipulation, but out of curiosity. You listen, not just to respond, but to understand. You watch great communicators not to copy their tactics, but to understand their timing, rhythm, energy. Because persuasion is as much about timing as it is about technique. It's the dance of knowing when to pause, when to punch, when to whisper, when to rise. And the only way to learn that is to keep showing up, to speak and stumble, to ask and misstep, to risk rejection again and again, not because you enjoy it, but because your mission matters more than your comfort. Learning makes you dangerous because now your message isn't frozen in time, it's alive. It breathes, it adapts, it grows. And people don't want perfection, they want real. They want someone who grows with them, who learns, adjusts, listens, applies, improves. Someone who doesn't pretend to know it all, but shows they're committed to getting better, to serving better, to communicating with excellence. And excellence is magnetic, not perfection excellence. Excellence says, I take this seriously. I honor your attention. I value your time. So I bring my best every time. That's what changes lives. Not a clever phrase, not a viral slogan, but a consistent, evolving, deeply human voice yours. A voice that has wrestled with doubt and chosen courage. A voice that has met rejection and chosen resilience. A voice that has failed and learned and stood back up not as a victim, not as a salesman, but as a leader. And so I leave you with this. If you want to be persuasive, become someone worth listening to. Not because you're the loudest, not because you know the most, but because you've earned your voice, because you've lived what you teach, because your presence calms the room, your story lifts the room, and your words move the room. That's persuasion, not a trick, not a script, but a transformation in you first, and through you in others. So speak, stand tall, be clear, be grounded, serve, invite, connect, challenge, and always believe in what you're asking people to believe in. Because if you do that long enough, deep enough, loud enough with your life, you'll never have to push people to say yes. They'll say it willingly because the truth in your voice reminded them of the truth in their own. And that is the highest persuasion of all. Imagine this. You walk into a room and you don't need to speak loudly. No gimmicks, no proving. You simply stand there steady as a mountain. Your eyes don't seek approval, they offer trust. Your voice doesn't scream to be heard, it lands straight into people's hearts. Your presence silences the room. Not because you are intimidating, but because you are so clear, so grounded, so real, you cannot be ignored. And when you speak, people listen, not just with their ears, but with their entire being. Because in your words, they don't just hear your message, they hear their own calling. You're not persuading them for a yes. You're awakening what has been sleeping inside them. You're not manipulating, you're illuminating. You're not shouting, you're stirring. That is real power. Power that doesn't come from force, but from honesty, integrity, and the unshakable alignment of your soul. Power that doesn't come from making people believe in you, but from helping them believe again in themselves. And if there is one truth I want you to carve into your spirit, it is this. Persuasion does not begin with others. It begins with you. You are the message. You are the mirror. You are the gateway others will walk through to find the greatest version of themselves. And only when you live that truth, only when you commit to being a fire not to burn, but to ignite, you will not only persuade, you will transform the world. Most people think speaking is about words, but it's not. Speaking is about power, the power to shape emotion, the power to unlock belief, the power to take what's invisible in your mind and make it undeniable in theirs. Speaking is not just a skill. It's a superpower. And if you master it, you don't just communicate, you command. Not through volume, not through pressure, but through presence. Because the truth is, people don't remember what you say. They remember how you made them feel. And when you master speaking, you learn how to control that feeling. You learn to speak in a way that makes people lean in, not scroll past. You speak in a way that stops time, that stills the room, that shakes the soul. Not with hype, but with truth. Not with noise, but with clarity. Not with tricks, but with resonance. And the first thing you must learn is that your voice doesn't come from your throat. It comes from your conviction. You don't need to sound like someone else. You don't need perfect grammar, perfect tone, perfect cadence. You need alignment. When your words match your energy, when your heart is behind your message, when your belief is louder than your fear, you become unstoppable. Because great speaking isn't about performance. It's about alignment. It's not about sounding smart. It's about sounding real. And when you sound real, people feel you. They don't just hear your message, they recognize themselves in it. And that's when everything changes. That's when you stop talking at people and start talking into them. Speaking is not about information, it's about transformation. You're not here to impress, you're here to impact. To speak in a way that changes something inside the person listening. To speak in a way that makes someone say, I can't go back to who I was before I heard that. And to do that, you must speak with intention. You must speak from the center of your truth. Not just what's polished, not just what's practiced, but what's real. Speak from your scars, not your script. Speak from your experience, not your ego. Speak from the pain you've lived through, the wisdom you've fought for, the lessons you've bled to learn. That's the voice people will follow. That's the voice that changes rooms. And once you understand that power doesn't live in the words alone, it lives in the energy behind them, you begin to speak differently. You stop chasing perfection and start channeling presence. You stop rehearsing to be impressive and start grounding yourself to be impactful, because your voice doesn't have to be loud to be felt. It has to be true. That's what shakes people. That's what makes them stop scrolling. That's what cuts through a world full of noise and lands straight in the chest. Great speakers are not remembered because they said what everyone else said. They're remembered because they meant it, because you could feel their story in their silence, because their pauses had weight, because their breath carried belief, because their delivery didn't beg for attention, it commanded respect. And that's your next shift. Your voice carries your identity. You cannot master speaking until you first master you, because people don't just hear your words, they feel your alignment. If you doubt yourself, your voice will tremble. If you shrink your truth, your voice will stutter. But when you stand in who you are, when you own your value, your vision, your voice, suddenly every word you say starts to land with power. Confidence doesn't come from what you know. It comes from what you've integrated, from what you've lived. Confidence is the echo of alignment. The voice that says, this message isn't theory, this is who I am. And when your speaking reflects that, you no longer have to push to be heard. People lean in because they can't ignore what feels real. Let's talk rhythm. Because how you deliver is as important as what you deliver. Speaking is music. It has tone, pace, breath, beat. A great speaker doesn't just talk, they compose. They understand tension and release. They use silence like punctuation. They don't rush to fill space. They let the message breathe. Because silence, when used well, doesn't lose attention, it deepens it. Your job is not to pour out everything you know. Your job is to deliver one truth so clearly, so cleanly, so confidently that it plants itself in the heart of the listener and takes root. That's how impact happens. Not through volume, not through speed, through precision. You don't need to speak faster, you need to speak truer. You don't need to sound smarter. You need to sound clearer. You don't need more words. You need more weight behind the ones you already have. That's how you master your speaking. That's how you turn your voice from a tool into a force. Because the greatest speakers are not the ones who speak the most, they are the ones who feel the deepest and dare to let others feel it too. If your words are polished but your soul is guarded, you'll be heard but never remembered. You'll be acknowledged but never felt. But when you speak with vulnerability, raw, honest, human, you don't just connect, you create trust. And in speaking, trust is everything. It's what opens hearts. It's what drops walls. It's what turns a message into a moment someone remembers forever. So speak from your wounds, not just your wins. Speak from the nights you almost gave up. Speak from the fears you outgrew. Speak from the loneliness you sat in when no one clapped and no one called and you still chose to rise. People don't follow perfection. They follow realness. And when you bring your whole self to the mic, not just your highlight reel, people feel safe to do the same in their lives. And that's where your influence expands. When your voice becomes more than words, it becomes permission. Permission to hope, permission to change, permission to be seen. And the key to that? Storytelling. Story is the language of the heart. Facts inform the mind, but stories move the soul. The brain may forget your steps and your strategies, but it will never forget how your story made someone feel. That one moment of honesty, of pain, of truth, of laughter. That's what lingers. That's what stays. That's what spreads. So tell your stories. Not for applause, but for connection. Tell them not to shine, but to serve. The stumbles, the doubts, the small victories, the turning points. Make people see the movie in their mind, not just hear the bullet points of your success. Because when someone can see themselves in your struggle, they trust your guidance. They don't just listen to you. They follow you. But it's not just what you say. It's how you say it. Your emotional range is your greatest asset. Too many speakers sound like robots, flat, rehearsed, soulless. But you are not here to recite. You are here to resonate. Use your voice like a symphony, not for drama, but for depth. Let your passion rise. Let your truth drop. Let your tone match the moment. Speak from fire when fire is needed. Speak from stillness when stillness is called for. Because your voice can punch like thunder or whisper like prayer, and both can be unforgettable when they come from truth. And here's what you must understand. People don't follow the most polished speaker. They follow the most honest one, the most present one, the most grounded one, the one who stands in front of the room or the camera or the world and does not flinch, not because they know everything, but because they've lived what they speak. That's the voice the world is starving for. Then listen carefully, because this is where it all converges. This is where speaking becomes more than a skill. It becomes your signature, your fingerprint on every room you enter, your echo in every life you touch. You see, most people speak to be remembered, but the masters, they speak to remind people of who they are, of what they forgot, of the power that's been buried beneath fear and silence. Your job is not just to share information. Your job is to awaken something inside them that was asleep. Your words are not decoration, they are activation. And if you want your voice to live beyond the moment, beyond the platform, beyond the applause, then speak from a place deeper than performance. Speak from purpose. Because when you speak with purpose, you don't need to sell, you don't need to shout, you don't need to convince. Your presence becomes permission. And people follow that. Not because you asked, but because they felt called. And that's what true speaking does. It calls people forward. Out of fear, out of stagnation, out of mediocrity, into motion, into clarity, into transformation. That's what your voice is capable of. And when you realize that, when you finally accept the responsibility of your voice, you will never speak the same again. Every sentence becomes sacred. Every pause becomes powerful. Every story becomes a vessel. And you become the channel. You don't own the message, you carry it, you deliver it, you protect it. Because somewhere, someone is waiting to hear the exact words you've been called to speak. And it might not be perfect, it might not be viral, but it might just be the moment that changes everything for them. So speak with courage. Speak with clarity. Speak with fire. Speak like it matters, because it does. Your voice is not a tool. It's a torch. And the world is full of people walking through darkness, not because they lack talent, but because they've never heard a voice that reminded them of their light. Be that voice. Because when it's all said and done, no one will remember every word you spoke, but they will remember how your words moved them, how they walked away a little taller, a little clearer, a little more alive. And in the end, that is the true mastery of speaking. To use your voice, not just to impress, but to ignite. Not just to be heard, but to be felt. Not just to communicate, but to elevate. That is your gift. That is your power. That is your legacy. Use it well. Becoming a thought leader is not about becoming famous. It's about becoming foundational. It's not about having followers. It's about being followed for the right reasons, not for noise, not for trends, but for truth. Because in a world full of opinions, a thought leader is not just another voice. They are the voice of clarity. They don't speak to be seen. They speak to awaken, to build, to shape, to disrupt what's shallow, to deepen what's real. And the first principle? Earn the right to speak. Not by shouting louder, not by copying louder voices, not by mimicking what's popular, but by living what you teach, by becoming the message before you ever publish it. Because if your words don't echo your habits, the world will smell it. If your ideas don't flow from your integrity, your voice will feel hollow. And you may impress people for a while, but you'll never influence them. Because influence is not built in one post, it's built in patterns. In the silent, private, unglamorous choices no one claps for. That's where your credibility grows. That's where thought leadership begins. And it starts with one decision. You stop reacting to culture and you start shaping it. You stop being a consumer of noise and you become a creator of meaning. You don't chase relevance. You stand in resonance. You speak what matters, even when it's not popular, even when it's misunderstood. Because you're not leading to win a moment. You're leading to build momentum for people, for principles, for purpose. You want to be a thought leader? You must think in seasons, not seconds. In decades, not days. You must be willing to be early and endure the silence before the echo comes. That means clarity is everything. A thought leader is not someone who has something to say. It's someone who has something worth saying and knows exactly why it matters. Vague voices fade, but a clear message cuts through time, through noise, through resistance, because truth doesn't expire and truth doesn't beg to be liked. So become obsessed with clarity. Speak less, say more. Cut the fluff, cut the filler, cut the borrowed brilliance. Say what only you can say, in the way only you can say it. Thought leadership is not about knowing more. It's about owning your voice. It's about choosing your lens. Because when you stop trying to be the answer to everything, you finally become the authority in something. And in that something, you plant your flag. You go deep. You take people with you. Because the world doesn't need another echo, it needs a frequency. And your frequency only comes when you stop being agreeable and start being authentic. You want to become a thought leader? Then say something that actually costs you something. Say something that's rooted in your scars, not your strategy. Say something you've wrestled with, bled for, sacrificed for, and now carry not as a theory, but as a truth. That's what people follow. That's what people feel. Not clever, not clean, but real. Because real thought leadership isn't safe. It's not sanitized for social media. It's not dipped in neutrality just to keep everyone comfortable. It's dangerous, not because it attacks, but because it awakens. And the moment you speak something true enough to wake someone up, you become a threat to the status quo. And you have to be okay with that. Because if your goal is to be liked, you'll never say anything that matters. But if your goal is to be useful, if your goal is to liberate people from confusion, from limitation, from mediocrity, then you'll speak what needs to be said, not what's expected. And when you do, when you finally speak from truth, not tactics, you'll notice something shift. You'll no longer be trying to grow your audience. You'll be growing a tribe of trust. People who don't follow you because you're polished, they follow you because you mirror their calling, because your courage gives them permission to stop hiding, because your clarity silences their doubt. That's when you become more than a content creator. That's when you become a catalyst. But don't get it twisted, this takes courage. The kind of courage most never practice. The courage to be misunderstood. The courage to be early. The courage to stand alone, not forever, but long enough to prove what others couldn't see. And courage doesn't mean recklessness. It doesn't mean shouting everything that crosses your mind. It means you filter your words through purpose. You don't speak for reaction, you speak for realignment. And that takes maturity. That takes discernment. That takes restraint. Because the deeper your voice goes, the more weight it carries. And when your words start to move people, shape thinking, drive behavior, you are no longer just expressing, you are entrusting. You are putting ideas into people's hands, hearts, and homes. That is not a role you take lightly. That is not something you do for likes. That is leadership. And leadership requires character. You want to be a thought leader? Then build a life that can carry the weight of influence. Build a rhythm that protects your voice. Build a mind that can think deeply. Build a heart that won't be hijacked by comparison, criticism, or clout. Because the more visible you become, the more disciplined you must be. Because popularity fades, but principle endures. And in the end, it's not the loudest voice that shapes the world. It's the most anchored. The one that does not flinch when trends shift. The one that does not bend under pressure. The one that rises consistently with conviction. Because true thought leaders don't chase the moment, they build movements. They don't need a viral post. They create generational ripple effects because their ideas are built on truth, not tactics. And how do you build that kind of voice? You become a student of your own message. You study what you teach. You practice what you preach. You master your craft before you multiply your platform. Because reach without roots is collapse waiting to happen. And too many people want to be heard without first becoming deep. They want to teach before they've become. They want to lead before they've lived. But your message only has power when it's earned through repetition, reflection, and refinement. A thought leader does not speak to be clever, they speak to be clear. They strip away everything that sounds good until what's left is what's true. And then they say it not once, but over and over, until the idea becomes part of the world's new vocabulary. Because the goal is not to impress people with your voice. It's to upgrade the conversation. And if you want to lead that conversation, you must know how to sit in silence, to think, to observe, to refine. That's what most won't do. They post, they publish, they press go on everything. But you sit with it. You wait. You test your idea against resistance, against time, against contradiction. And then, when the words emerge, they are solid, they are sharp, they are seasoned. And when people hear them, they change. That is the difference between noise and voice. Noise is reactive. Voice is intentional. Noise grabs attention. Voice gives direction. Noise fades. Voice forms. But don't walk this alone. Every great thought leader was once mentored, was once sharpened by someone else's insight. Don't let your ego isolate you. Seek wisdom. Sit at the feet of those who've already walked the path. Read their books, listen to their stories, study their failures, learn their rhythm. And then, don't copy them, carry what's useful, discard what's not, and craft what is uniquely yours. Because this journey isn't about being the next insert name here. It's about becoming the first and only you. That's what the world needs. A voice that cannot be replicated. Because it was forged, not fabricated, developed, not downloaded. Then here it comes, the final surge. The fire that doesn't just inspire, but awakens. The moment where your voice becomes more than expression. It becomes legacy. Because a true thought leader doesn't measure their impact by likes, views, or applause. They measure it by echoes, by the shifts they create in people who never even knew their name. by the new questions they plant in the hearts of the next generation, by the ripple that starts as a whisper and becomes a wave long after they're gone. You don't lead thought just to be relevant. You lead thought to rebuild reality. You take what's broken in culture and systems and mindset and you offer a better frame, a clearer path, a deeper question. And if you do it well, you won't just inform people, you will form them. You won't just be followed, you will be felt. In boardrooms, in classrooms, in quiet moments where someone faces a hard decision and hears your words guiding them toward truth. But none of that happens by accident. You must choose to become this. You must commit to the slow burn, to the deep work, to becoming the kind of person who doesn't just say important things but lives a life that backs them every day, especially when it's hard, especially when it's quiet, especially when no one's watching. Because influence without character is dangerous. But influence built on truth, on service, on substance, that kind of influence doesn't just touch lives, it multiplies them. And when your voice becomes a mirror that reflects people's potential back to them, when your presence becomes a reminder of who they're called to be, you're no longer just a thought leader. You're a pathfinder, a builder of new worlds, a carrier of light. So speak with purpose, write with clarity, think with depth, share with courage, live with discipline, and build a voice that outlives you. That becomes a blueprint for those who come after. That becomes a light in times you'll never see. That becomes a legacy of thought, because you were bold enough to not just join the conversation, but to elevate it. That is what it means to lead with thought. That is what it means to lead with soul. That is what it means to be unforgettable. You don't get the life you want by chance. You get it by design. You don't stumble into greatness. You build it thought by thought, plan by plan, decision by decision, because hope is not a strategy. Wishing is not execution, and waiting is not progress. The truth is, most people want a better life, but they're thinking like someone stuck in survival. They're not building plans, they're building excuses. They're not making moves, they're reacting to moments. But you're here because you're done with that. You're here because something in you refuses to keep drifting. You're here because you've realized a good life doesn't come from reacting. It comes from thinking strategically, not rigidly, not coldly, but intentionally. Strategic thinking isn't just for CEOs and generals. It's for anyone who refuses to waste their one shot at this life. If your days feel random, if your outcomes feel inconsistent, if your purpose feels out of reach, it's not because you're incapable. It's because you haven't been taught to think like a builder, to think like someone who's architecting the life they want, not just hoping it shows up. That ends today, because you're going to learn how to think ahead, how to design with clarity, how to move with foresight, how to stop reacting to life and start directing it. And the first lesson? Think in outcomes, not emotions. Lesson 1, think in outcomes, not emotions. Emotions are important. They tell you what hurts, what matters, what needs to heal. But they should never be the driver of your decisions, because emotions shift like weather, and you cannot build a legacy on a storm. Most people live their lives in emotional reaction. They quit when they're tired. They snap when they're triggered. They stop when they're scared. And then they wonder why they don't feel powerful. But strategy says, feel your feelings, but follow your outcomes. What's the result you want? What's the life you're building toward? And what must you do even when it's uncomfortable to get there? Strategic thinking removes the drama. It clears the fog. It asks, what action leads me closer to my vision? Not, what do I feel like doing right now? Because here's the truth. Your feelings don't decide your future, your decisions do. When you start thinking in outcomes, you stop chasing approval. You stop being reactive. You start playing the long game. And in the long game, discipline outperforms mood every single time. Now let's go deeper. Lesson 2, Reverse engineer everything. Don't just dream. Deconstruct. What's the exact outcome you want? Income? Impact? Freedom? Influence? Name it. Write it. Get specific. Now, instead of asking, how do I get there? Ask, if I were already there, what would I have done to get here? That question flips everything. It pulls you out of confusion and into clarity, because now you're not guessing, you're building backward. Want a business? Study the model. Want to speak on stages? Study the steps. Want emotional peace? Study the habits of those who have it. This is how strategic thinkers move. They start with a vision and build the bridge backwards. No more hoping. No more winging it. No more walking blindly into another year. You reverse engineer it, one layer at a time. Lesson 3, leverage is the multiplier of strategic thinkers. You are not here to do everything. You are here to do what matters effectively. Strategic people don't win because they work harder. They win because they understand leverage. They know how to apply a small force in the right place to create a massive impact. Leverage is when one move does the work of 10, when one relationship opens 5 doors, when one decision frees you from 20 distractions. So ask yourself, where is my time going? Where is my energy going? What am I doing manually that could be automated? What am I doing alone that could be delegated? Strategic people remove friction. They remove the unnecessary. They remove the ego that says, I have to do it all myself. Because the goal isn't to be busy, it's to be effective. And leverage is the shortcut. That's not a shortcut. It's smart work, not more work. Want to scale your results? Find your leverage points. Build systems. Invest in people. Create content that works while you sleep. Say no to 90% of distractions so you can dominate the 10% that truly matters. Now here's another one. Lesson 4. Every day must point to the vision. This is not about perfection, it's about alignment. Every day you live is either pushing you closer to your dream or further into delay disguised as comfort. The food you eat, the way you speak, the calls you take, the content you consume, the people you allow close. It's all building something. The only question is what? So the strategic thinker doesn't ask, was today busy? They ask, was today in alignment? Because motion without direction is waste. But motion with vision, that's momentum. That's when life bends. That's when you stop surviving days and start designing decades. Lesson 5. Use mental models, not just motivation. Motivation can spark action. But strategic thinkers don't rely on sparks. They rely on systems of thought. They think in frameworks. They ask better questions. They don't just react to what's happening. They understand how to think about it. A mental model is a lens, a way of seeing, a shortcut to clarity when others are drowning in complexity. They ask, what's the root cause here, not just the symptom? If this were simple, what would it look like? What's the 80-20 here, the 20% of effort that gives 80% of results? When you build a toolbox of models, first principles, opportunity cost, second-order thinking, inversion, you outthink the chaos. You rise above the noise. Because strategy isn't just execution. It's discernment. It's knowing where not to focus. It's knowing when to stop as much as when to go. Lesson 6. Schedule thinking time. Most people schedule tasks. Strategic thinkers schedule thought. Because clarity doesn't come by accident. Breakthroughs don't happen in inboxes. Solutions aren't found while you're drowning in meetings. Thinking is working. And the clearer you're thinking, the less effort your action requires. Even 30 minutes a week, no phone, no distractions, just pen, paper, and deep questions like, what is the bottleneck in my progress right now? What am I avoiding that needs my courage? What would make everything I'm doing easier or irrelevant? This habit alone can transform your entire year because most people are busy being busy. But strategic thinkers, they pause so they can pull ahead. Lesson 7. Always ask, what's the one move that changes everything? This is the power question. The one that removes overwhelm. The one that silences noise. The one that unlocks exponential progress. In every season, in every project, in every problem, there's almost always one move that changes the whole game. Strategic thinkers hunt for that move. They don't try to do everything. They look for the keystone action, the domino that knocks down 10 others, the one thing that, if solved, unlocks everything else. It could be a conversation you're avoiding, a habit you haven't locked in, a hire you need to make, a fear you need to face. One thing, find it, name it, do it. Because when you think like a strategist, your results stop being accidental. They become inevitable. Let's bring it home. Because now you know a better life isn't built on chance. It's built on strategy. It's not about hustle. It's not about luck. It's not about waiting for the right time. It's about clarity, leverage, discipline, and most of all, it's about thinking like a creator, not a survivor. You weren't meant to drift. You weren't born to repeat what's average. You were built to architect something different, to design with purpose, to move with foresight, to live a life that is not reactive, but intentional. And here's the truth. If your life doesn't feel like it fits, you were never meant to fit it. You were meant to change it, to reshape it, to rethink it strategically so it aligns with who you are becoming, not who you've been told to be. From today forward, let this be your standard. No more random days. No more wasted energy. No more letting circumstances decide what happens next. From now on, you decide. You build the life you want on purpose. You don't beg for outcomes, you engineer them. You don't just wish for impact, you leverage every hour to create it. You don't just react to life, you lead it. This is what strategic thinking gives you. A mind that moves faster than fear. A focus that outlasts fatigue. A future that doesn't need to be found because it's being built one move at a time. So don't ask if it's possible. Don't ask if it's too late. Ask, what am I willing to think like, act like, and build like to create the life I know I was meant for? Because you don't need another goal. You need a strategy. And now, you've got one. So go build. Deliberately. Boldly. Strategically. Because this is your time. And the life you want is waiting to be designed.